Shalom, shalom, giving honor and praise unto Yah, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. This is your brother, Yeshaya Yisrael, aka Kashub the Danite. What we're going to get into right now is a presentation entitled Check the Reference. In this presentation, I'm not going to read the reference material, but I'm going to cite the source in which I acquired the information from, and leave it up to you, the listener, male and female alike, to check the reference and let us know whether you agree or disagree, whether the information is correct or is the information pseudo. So we want to sit there and just present that right there. Let that be noted and understood. Also, hoping that everybody in the sound of the voice here will subscribe to Maccabees TV, spelled as Maccabees, Maccabees TV. Subscribe to that whenever you get the chance. And once again, giving honor and praise to Yah, the creator and maker of heaven and earth. What we're going to do right now, we want to get into a presentation speaking about the aspect of history as presented from a Hebrew Israelite. Now, one of the things to point out is that people like to sit there and say, among certain white people, that American slavery and the first American slave master was a black man by the name of Anthony Johnson. But we know, who study history, that is emphatically to be incorrect. Anthony Johnson became a slave master in the year 1655 by the court of Virginia. You understand? So with that being the case, how is it that in the year 1655, he was the pioneer of American slavery, like some people try to say, when there was a black man that was made a slave permanently in the year 1640 by the name of John Punch? You can look that up in your own time for reference material purposes. One of the sources comes from a reference called Slavery and the Making of America by Horton, Horton. All right, so it should be noted and understood that it is quite impossible for a black man by the name of Anthony Johnson to be the first permanent slaveholder or the first indentured slaveholder. Okay? Now, the colonies that became the United States was first set up in the year 1607 in what we call Virginia. The last one being set up in the year 1732 in what we call the state of Georgia of today. The United States of America, on the other hand, came to be, for as many of us know, in the year 1776. All right, so that's something to be noted and understood. Now, in discussing the aspect of slavery, it seems as if the United States wants to blame the colonists, and the colonists wants to blame the Dutch, and the Dutch want to sit there and blame the Spaniards. But in actuality, you will begin know and see that the British became the Americans in history. You understand? And it is all of those different European nations and some other ones that were mentioned that were all in cahoots together for what we call the Atlantic slave trade. So for one of them to try to throw the towel to the other and then throw the hot potato from there to the other one is emphatically incorrect. How can we prove that? It's because the first English major, or even the first English into the slave trade, when you get right down into it by name, was a guy by the name of John Hawkins. And he entered the slave trade in the year 1562. Okay, so let that be noted and understood. And by the year 1564, he set out on another slave voyage. You understand? And when he did that, he was actually given the sanction by Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I was the successor of Queen Mary of England. So that's something to be noted and understood. She took the throne of England in the year 1558. So I just want to sit there and have some of those things and references to be pointed out for edification purposes. How is it then, knowing all of that, knowing good and well that John Hawkins, when he did trade with slaves, he never came to what is commonly now called the United States. He never came to any of the colonies that became the United States. You understand? He was a British man working for the British, and he actually did slave trading of black people with the Spaniards and with the Portuguese. You understand? In the places that we correctly now call Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia. So that's something to be noted and understood in history. That particular guy that we spoke of, John Hawkins, actually died in the year 1595. So Just want to sit there and let that be noted and understood. Before the opening of the 17th century, the English people were already involved in the slave trade. So how then can a man who took the name Anthony Johnson, which is both an English name, Johnson is English as well as Anthony is English, how did he acquire that name, either give it to him or self-appointed, if he was supposed to have been the pioneer of American slavery? It's impossible, brothers and sisters. All right. So just want to sit there and let that be noted and understood. New York, brothers and sisters, was a colony that came to be in the year of 1664. When you go into a reference book entitled Slavery, The History of Slavery by Susan Everett, that author gets into the fact of showing that many people that were slaves in New York, dated as early as 1643, were slaves that were taken from Brazil by the Dutch and delivered into New York. When you go into a book written by Hugh Thomas entitled The Slave Trade, you will find out that the Dutch had slave posts in what we call commonly Manhattan in 1613. So I just want to sit there and let that be noted and understood, because it's impossible for all of those nations to be in cahoots with each other and then try to sit there and say that one leeching off the other in the slave trade can now try to say that a black man is the pioneer of American slavery. All right, so let that be noted and understood. Another thing, brothers and sisters, to point out is that many people try to come to the house of Israel or the house of Israel stating that the Torah comes from the principles of Ma'at, which emphatically is also horribly a misnomer. Because when you go into the Torah, namely in Exodus chapter 20, it speaks against idolatry. It speaks about keeping the Sabbath. The principles of Ma'at does not endorse the bashing of idolatry. It does not endorse the prohibition of idol worship. So that's something to be noted and understood. Many scholars like to go and talk about Akhenaten, talking about he was the father and the originator of what they call monotheism. Still, is not the origin of the Torah, because not only does the Torah teach monotheism, the Torah also teaches against idolatry, which Akhenaten would have been considered a bad person when you go into Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 2 and 3, because the children of Israel don't pour libations to the sun. So let that be noted and understood. When you get into the aspect of what they are attempting to present, and then you study sociology, archaeology, anthropology, and so forth and so on, you will sit there and see that the Torah is the only culture upon the earth that bangs against idolatry horribly. No other culture on earth prohibits idol worship, that actually endorses bashing idols, breaking their altars, and so forth and so on. So that's something to be noted. You can sit there and for your own time, you can look at the Kibra Nagast. You can look at the principles of Ma'at. You can look at the ziggurat inscriptions in ancient Sumer. You can even sit there and go as far as Babylonian Code of Hammurabi. None of them sit there and speak against worshiping of idols. So now, how do you sit there and take an external reference then and transform the information? Because we now know and understand, when we study about Tacitus, the Roman historian, he stated in the era in which he lived, we're speaking now about the 2nd and the 1st century AD, right? He stated that when Pompey of Rome went into the temple in Jerusalem, that he saw no images. And that Pompey actually was asking, well, can you make an image of me? And the Israelites in this time said, we're not allowed to do such a thing. So now after Pompey of Rome, he was a Rome consulate. Then you had Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, after him, you eventually had the Emperor Augustus. After Augustus, you had Tiberius. After Tiberius, you had Caligula. Caligula too, according to the same historian Tacitus, wanted his image put in the temple. And the Israelites, according to Tacitus, were willing to fight before they would sit there and put the image of Caligula or anybody else's image inside of the temple. So let that be noted and understood. The same historian Tacitus speaks about when Antiochus put what they call Zeus, the Greek god, inside the temple. That set off the guy of the Maccabees. So it's impossible then to know the history and culture of a people to try to then turn around and say, oh, they must have copied from the Egyptians to get their own culture. Emphatically incorrect. All right, so that's something to be noted and understood. Now, a lot of brothers and sisters, and I mean no offense in what I'm about to say, they like to quote the elder, may he rest in peace now, Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark did a presentation entitled, Who is a Jew? And in that presentation, he stated that the Hebrew faith is known throughout different countries throughout the world. In that slide terminology that he was talking about saying Hebrew faith, what he emphatically is trying to allude to is saying that there were really no people called the children of Israel, that there really were no Hebrew people. They just happen to just have a faith throughout the different world, parts of the world. So, but what a scholar then has to do is realize, hold on, how is it that if the people are noted to have the faith of the Hebrews, that means the people of the Hebrews have to be in existence for their faith to be noted? That's just logic at that particular case. And as stated, I am not trying to sit there and throw stones. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but just want to sit there and let it be noted and understood for edification purposes. Now, the term Jew that many people like to sit there and ride upon and love upon and so forth and so on, emphatically is an incorrect translation of the Hebrew word Yahudi. Yahudi means Judite, and it comes from the Hebrew word Yahudah. Yahudah means Judah. So that's something for edification purposes, brothers and sisters, to be noted and understood. Now, in the Hebrew language, the word Yahudah ends in this particular letter right here, which is the letter Hey. It makes the H sound. When you sitting up there and having a noun in Hebrew, such as Yahudah, a person, place, or thing being a noun, when you sit there and show the possession of it, it transformed from that letter that we showed to this particular letter right here, which is the letter Yod, making the Y sound. This is why phonetically in Hebrew, Yahudah becomes Yahudi when you go into the book of Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23 in the scriptures. You understand? So anytime you see Jew in there, let it be noted and understood that is actually a mistranslation from the Hebrew word Yahudi, which literally means Judite. Now, how can we prove that in the scriptures? And as stated, open for constructive criticism. When you go to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 43 to verse 44, you read about a group of people called the Manassites. The word Manassite in Hebrew is said as Menashe, and it follows the same structure in the noun possession as Yahudah to Yahudi. So does Menashe become Menashe. So that's something to be noted and understood. So another thing to show emphatically that there's no way in the world that phonetically from the Hebrews that a such thing as a Jew exists is because this particular letter right here, which is the letter Dalet, which makes the D sound, never ever drops phonetically within Hebrew. So because that letter never drops off, whether you're dealing with verbs or nouns or so forth and so on, shows you that Yahudah or Yahudi does not become Jew or Jewish. Okay, so that's something to be noted for edification purposes. In concluding this particular point and stance, as stated, the name of this is entitled Check the Reference, History Presented by a Hebrew Israelite, Part 1. And there's going to be other parts to this because we just want to sit there and have it to be noted and understood about our references, why we state what we state, why do we feel the way that we feel, and the energy that we're attempting to bring. This, as stated, once again, is not to bang against anybody, is not to bash anybody, and not to sound hypocritical. The guy who was up there making those videos entitled Hidden Colors, you fake, yo. The children of Israel ain't going to sell out like that dude. So let that be noted and understood. No shots intended. All right, shalom.